So we've been doing a series called Relationship RX. Whole idea is, if you go to a doctor, they'll give you a prescription. This is what you need to do. And so we're doing the same thing. We're talking about different things concerning relationships. Before I get into it, I always like to start off with something funny, especially when we're teaching on relationships. Tonight, I really need something funny for what we're gonna go over. So let me tell you this. There's an older couple that I heard about. They've been married for 60 years. They're at a church get-together. And the church fellowship was going on, and someone asked them, how did you stay married for 60 years and have such a good marriage? And the man, answered and said, well, I respected my wife, I honored her, I loved her, took her all over the world, traveled with her. In fact, on our 25th wedding anniversary, I took her to Beijing, China. And someone yelled out, people sort of clapped, like, well, awesome. And someone yelled out and said, what'd you do for your 50th wedding anniversary? He said, I went back and picked her up. Some of you get that later. But anyway, that's the way to have a successful marriage in that guy's view. Anyway, someone said this. They said there are 3 rings in marriage: the engagement ring, the wedding ring, and suffering. You guys are a tough crowd tonight. Come on, help me out. So we're going to talk tonight about, I just entitled this one real simple, Happily Ever After. So if you're taking notes, you can write that down, Happily Ever After. As I do always, I want to say this real quickly. If you've been married for a long period of time, you still need to hear what I'm going to say. Marriage for a long period of time doesn't always mean it's been good, right? And if you're here and you're single, you should be doing everything you can to take notes on what we're going to talk about. I am going to talk about marriage again this weekend, and you might think, I thought this was just like relationships. I'm getting suckered into coming to church, and then you're hitting marriage like you are. But marriage for me as a pastor, because when I have people raise their hands over the couple times we've done this, I've had people raise their hands, and almost everyone in our church that raised their hands is married. There's very few single. There are single, but compared to marriage, there's no comparison. So if you're single, you're preparing for marriage. Well, at least you should be. So if you're preparing for marriage, you should be doing everything you can to get ready for marriage. So tonight, I'm gonna start off, I promise you we'll end up about happily ever after. Everybody wants the kind of marriage that Hollywood has painted, the happily ever after marriage. And people look at some people's marriages and say, man, I want a marriage like that. But the truth of the matter is, in order to have a marriage like the ones you see that you really like, it takes work. It just didn't happen. It's just, wow, these 2 great people got together and they're so perfect for one another. There's no such thing. You have to work in order to have a marriage that's going to be successful. So here's what I want to do tonight. I want to give you some statistics tonight that I found through just doing some research, because I believe you need to hear these things. We live in a time right now that the current age group that is coming into the 20, 21, 22 year of age, right around there, that group and down believe you don't even need to get married. So, if you're in church, you might have a different thought pattern, but if you are outside of church, 21 and down, 22 and down, they believe you don't need to get married at all. That same age group believes, and these are not my statistics I'm gonna get to them in a moment. That same age group believes God really doesn't care whether it's a man or a woman. He just doesn't care. Now here's my deal. You'll never have me get up here and batter people that are doing things different than what I think that they should do. But I will tell you this, the Bible's pretty clear. Unless you think the Bible's some ancient book that has no relevancy at all in our lives and it's not relevant, then unless you're a person who says, I don't even believe that, I don't even know that it is God's word, then you'd have to really sit in church and say, I don't believe God. God doesn't care about who gets married. It can be 2 monkeys if they want to get married. I mean, whatever. God doesn't care. That's not true. God actually does care. Now, our job as a church is to love everyone, but we are not going to ever say that we compromise God's word in order to say, well, we sure don't want to offend anyone. We're not here to offend anyone. We're just here to tell people what the truth is. And so we're going to look at some statistics that I think are, thanks, I appreciate it. One person clapped. But anyway, we're going to look at some statistics tonight. And I have to have this because there's too many of them in order to read them. But in the United States of America, They'll put these up on the screen. 17% of all divorces that occur are due to adultery on one part, either the husband or the wife. That means 83% of marriages that fell have nothing to do with adultery. Which most people say, the reason why divorce is going on is because everyone's out there, they got a girlfriend, a boyfriend, they're screwing around behind the other person's back. It's not true. 83% of the marriages that fell do not fail because of adultery. They fell because people decided, we don't want to work on our marriage. We don't want to have to do what it takes to have a marriage that is successful. 83%. That's a large number that fails due to people refusing to want to work on their marriage. Now, you might be here and say, Pastor, man, we tried everything that we could. My husband kept on beating me and beating my kids. I just want to make sure we're up front because I do this every time we teach on something like this. If you're being beat in a marriage, you need to get out as fast as you can, period. So if you're here tonight and you say, you're telling me I can get out, I can get a divorce? I'm telling you, get out and put an ultimatum to the person who's beating you. You're either gonna get help and get change and get counseling, or I'm out of here because I'm not gonna have my children or myself get beat up by you. And it's usually a guy, so I'm not gonna, if there's a guy here that's getting beat up by a girl, we need to talk privately. Anyway, that's a whole different thing. Sorry. Here's a quote that you might just get something out of this while I read it. It'll be on the screen. I can't put it in any better language than this. Marriages fall apart through erosion. It's not just one event. The breakdown starts slowly and proceeds with one tiny misstep after another until the sum of these becomes so large that relationships collapse. In other words, if you talk to someone and say, why are you getting a divorce? Why is your marriage in the condition it's in? Most of them will tell you something and you'll look at them and think, seriously, that's why you're getting a divorce? It's not a large thing. It's not a big thing. It's a bunch of things that were refused to be worked on when they should have been. And after years of just having that go on in their marriage, they finally just said, I'm done. I can't put up with it any longer. And so I want to help that. And I believe with all my heart what we're going to talk about tonight, there is no one here that you're at the end of your story. Your story's still being written. You do not have to just say, this is it, we're going to get a divorce. Your story can change. And if you're here and you say, Pastor, I'm divorced and it's just what happened, let me just tell you some good news. God has someone better for you. If you're here and you're sitting, you say, man, I am divorced and I don't know what life's gonna bring me now. I do. God's always gonna do better than he did before. But let me tell you this, on your way of sitting right here now and not being married yet, you should be doing everything you can to work on your marriage for the future, work on your life so you're ready for marriage. So here's some statistics up on the screen. These are the 5 top reasons marriages in divorce, according to Dr. Rich Nicastro, who wrote The ABCs of Effective Communication. Number 1, the marriage or relationship started for the wrong reasons. How many know in the society we live in today, most marriages start because people are sleeping together. And they just figure, well, we'll get married. It's probably better to do that. It'd be better not to sleep together. Hey man, this is gonna go well tonight. Number two, the couple has grown apart over the years to such a degree that they are no longer, they have no longer any common interest. Interesting. I'll just throw this out here for free. I got a phone call today. I just think it's interesting. I got a phone call today from someone and they said, I need to talk to you and I need your advice. I love it when someone wants my advice, especially when they don't listen to you when you give it to them. So I said, sure, what's up? Well, I went and bought a car and my wife doesn't know about it. And I don't plan on telling her. I'm gonna park it somewhere else. I said, now you bought this car already? Well, I ordered it. I said, you need to go right back to wherever you ordered that car and you need to cancel it immediately. Well, I'm nearing 50 years old. Ain't no woman gonna tell me I can or cannot have a car. I said, well, welcome to divorce. Because if I was your wife, I would wanna know, before you bought the car, that you were gonna buy the car. Like, talk to each other. I pay all the bills, this person said. I said, wow, that's awesome. I do too, I pay them all. I'm the guy that writes out all the stuff, So that gives me the right to go buy something my wife doesn't know about? Just a side journey. Just so some of you need to hear this. You need to talk with the person you're married to and discuss major decisions and not hide things from them. Thank you, Pastor Mike. That was awesome. Number 3. You want to talk about growing apart in your marriage, that will cause it to grow apart. Number 3, years of unresolved conflicts and deep emotional wounding, this is according to this doctor, have shattered the very fabric of the union. Number 4, one or both parties unconsciously repeat unhealthy relationship patterns from their family of origin. Could we talk? I could just preach tonight about the family of origin you came from. Because this person that talked to me today said, my dad, this is what this person told me. They said, my dad did whatever he wanted in the marriage. And I said, that's your dad's problem. That's not the way marriage is supposed to be. That's not how, if you look at your mom and dad and say, my mom got ran all over by my dad and my dad did whatever he wanted anytime he wanted, you need to now go to the Bible and see what it has to say because your dad was wrong. God bless your dad, but your dad was wrong. So, one or both parties have these unhealthy things that they keep on repeating. And some of you come from that kind of a background where your family had unhealthy kind of things that they did in their life, and now you're repeating them in your marriage. And you're gonna have to be the one that stops them. Number 5, the marriage or relationship is built upon expectations that cannot support the realities of a committed relationship. So in other words, we underestimate the amount of work it takes for a marriage, that you think, we dream about this kind of marriage. It takes a lot of work to have a dream marriage. Are y'all out there? You want a dream marriage? Man, I want a marriage where we're not fighting. I want a marriage where it's not bad all the time. It takes like a ton of work for that to happen. So back to statistics, just real quick, and I'll get to scriptures in a moment for you that are here and you're saying, what, is he gonna open the Bible up? I'll get to some in a minute, I promise you. This is interesting. I did a study on how much they spend for a wedding. Listen to this is what I found out. This is just recently, I just looked it up. The average wedding cost in America right now, not including the honeymoon, is $26,984. The average wedding dress is $1,099. The average month spent planning the wedding, 14 months. Average hours spent planning a wedding, 120 hours. Here's the bizarre thing. The average spent in premarital counseling is 3 hours. And the average cost of premarital counseling is free. What doesn't add up right there? I mean, are any of you seeing what I'm saying? So in other words, girls, you do most of the planning. We know that. Most guys don't want anything to do with it. They're just saying, yeah, that's fine, whatever. But you spend all that time, 14 months in preparation for your wedding day that is a one-day event that when it's all said and done, you more than likely are thinking in your mind, because I know I was when my daughter got married, why did we just do that? Why did we just spend that kind of money for this quick thing to happen? Everybody ate, everyone's gone, you're married, you're going on your honeymoon, and it's all done. And then you spend 3 hours in premarital counseling. And you know it should be reversed. There should be like 14 months of counseling. All right. So let me just say this real quick and we'll go to some scriptures. Happily ever after, when you think about that phrase, when you think about happily ever after, you ought to write this down. Happily ever after comes by preparing for the morning after. Because you're gonna wake up with Tom in the morning. You're gonna wake up with Susie in the morning, and I guarantee you, morning after morning when that happens, you might have been like a lot happier if you went through some counseling premarital before you got married that might have made you miserable thinking, why do I have to go through this? But you would have been a lot happier if you could have found out some stuff about this guy or this girl you were marrying, how they tick. We're not talking about if you go through this, you won't get married. We're talking about if you go through this, you'll stay married. In other words, you found out about each other. You found out how they tick. You found out some things about them that will help you out to treat them the way that they need to be treated. Those are important things. Are you with me? So let's go to scripture. I'm gonna go to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. If you'd like to go there, you can. 1 Corinthians chapter 7. I'm gonna be using the Message Bible in some of the things that I read. If I change up, I'll tell you. So if you don't have that, you can just look on the screen. Here's what it says. 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verse 1, Message Bible. Now, getting down to the questions you've asked in your letter to me, first, this is the question: is it a good thing to have sexual relations? Now, I don't know if you guys get this or not. Paul started the church at Corinth and then left. And they sent him a letter and said, hey, is it okay to have sex? I don't ever get questions like that. But anyway, all right. It goes on and says this, verse 2, certainly. Now, if we ended there like most Christians read their Bible, you'd be like, awesome. Certainly, but only within a certain context. Now watch this. I don't think you can get any clearer this about marriage. Watch. It is good for a man to have a wife and for a woman to have a husband. That's pretty clear, right? Then it says this, sexual drives are strong, but marriage is strong enough to contain them. Oh man, that's watch what he says. Marriage is strong enough to contain them and provide for a balanced and fulfilling sexual life in a world of sexual disorder. So outside of marriage, there's a bunch of sexual disorder outside of marriage. But let me just tell you this. When you take sexual disorder that you're in outside of marriage and you get married, you just bring the same sexual disorder into the marriage. And we live in a society right now. We have people, you know, if you still read the newspaper, you know, I don't know, I don't read one, but people read them still. And there's those people that are in there, Dr. So-and-so's answering your questions. Dr. So-and-so, how can I get my marriage a little more excitement in it? Dr. So-and-so, I'm not gonna say the name, but you know who I'm talking about. Here's their advice. Well, there's nothing wrong with, you know, bringing other people in. There's nothing wrong with having like movies that you watch. Nothing wrong with doing, are you a Christian telling me to do that? Are you just some person in the world telling me how to spice up my marriage that has no idea what God said in his word? Because that's sexual disorder. Now, I know you might be here and saying, Pastor, don't even say those words. I brought my kid in service. It's okay. You can't even imagine what they're hearing in school. If you actually talk to them, you'd be like shocked what they actually hear in school. This is nothing compared to that. So there's a bunch of sexual disorder, he says. And he said, but listen, he said, the marriage is strong enough to contain what needs to be going on in your marriage with sex. Your marriage is able to contain that. In other words, all the stuff that you think, I wanted to get married so bad, I can't contain myself. Pastor, I need a husband. Pastor, I need a wife. He said, your marriage can handle that. Once you get married, it all can be handled inside of a marriage. But let me show you some statistics will blow your mind. When I was studying this out, I was like, wow. First of all, it's estimated that up to 70% of couples cohabitate before marriage. In other words, they live together before they get married. How many? 70%. We're gonna try this out for a while. You know, that's what we're supposed to do. You go drive a car before you buy it. I'm gonna try her out before I, have to be hitched to her. 50 years, and man, that's a long time. Come on, 3 people are laughing. Listen, all right. Here's some cohabitation facts. Watch this. 80% of the people who live together before they're married break up. 80% before the wedding or afterwards in divorce. 80%. The national average of divorce is 50%. But if you lived together before you got married, 80% of them get a divorce. That's a lot. Only 12% have a marriage that lasts over 10 years. There's an 88% divorce rate once married. That's just bizarre. Nearly 50% of them never even get married, but they keep repeating the cycle over and over again with different women or different men. They move out with that one, and then they move in with another one. This is pretty mind-boggling. Now check this out. We never think about this. Here's what happens to their children. Listen to this. Children are 10 times more likely to be sexually abused when they had parents that lived together before they got married, 3 times more likely to be expelled from school, 5 times more apt to live in poverty, 22 more times likely to be incarcerated, and 3 times more likely to get pregnant as a teen. People say, well, I don't see any use in getting married. Well, getting married and then, of course, being in a church will change everything. Instead of just being married out or living together out there and thinking that it's okay, God's okay with this. Watch this. And they'll put these on the screen. This is done by the University of Chicago, Divorce in America. The average divorce rate right now in America is 50%. If they're not affiliated with any religion, stays right at 50%. If they're affiliated with a religion, it's at 42%. If they are an evangelical Christian who attends a church regularly, it drops down to 38%. But then they went on further and did a study on church attendance. Check this out. They never attend church at all. Divorce rate, 49%. Less than once a year, divorce rate, 46%. About once or twice a year, divorce rate, 46%. Several times a year, drops down to 42%. About once a month, divorce rate drops down to 42%. 2 or 3 times a month, it drops down to 41%. Check it out. Nearly every week, it drops down to 31%. Every week, it drops down to 27%. Now, people say, church doesn't matter. No, it doesn't matter if you go to church. Check this out. A 1998 survey by Georgia Family Council found that among couples who pray together weekly, only 7% have ever seriously considered a divorce, compared to 65% of those who never prayed. 65% of them consider divorce. So in other words, start praying with your wife. Start praying with your husband. And you're much less likely to ever have to have a problem with, man, I'm gonna get a divorce. So here's it's leading me all to some things that we'll talk about being happily ever after. I know some of you are like, oh my gosh, it's crazy stuff. The Apostle Paul would go into towns like Corinth, that's where we get the book of Corinthians, or Ephesians, where we get the book of Ephesus. Ephesus is where it was at. We get the book of Ephesians. Paul went into these communities. Let me just explain to you what these communities were like. You might not like to hear this, but it's just interesting. These communities were like our nowadays Las Vegas, but worse. Now, I know you might think, how could you get worse than Las Vegas? This is my opinion. I'm sure Las Vegas is bad enough. I've been there. It's not good. I was there for meetings one time with Brother Hagin in Las Vegas. And, in the daytime, you just go for a walk. You're walking down the street and I don't know if they still do this back years ago, but people are just passing out things to you and it's naked women on the front of it and it's inviting you to go see them. And people, they're all laying on the ground, so if you got your kids with you and you're walking, you're like, you're trying to cover their face because these things are all on the ground. Let me tell you why I think Corinth was worse and why Ephesus was worse. Because in their cities, they weren't called churches, but they had like synagogues that people would come and worship at. And in these synagogues, they had priests that were in there. They had priestess, women that were in there. And this is how you honored them. When you came in, if you were gonna honor their God, you came into this place and you had sex on the altar with one of those. This isn't a lie, I'm not making it up. I know you might be like, that's just ridiculous. No, it's actually all documented, it's true. In order to please their God, in order to get favor from their God, you ended up having to have sex with one of these things on the altar, one of these people that, can you imagine all the disease? Can you imagine all the stuff that was going on back in that day? So Las Vegas is bad. Some of these other cities are bad, but that's really bad. Paul comes into them. This is why I want you to hear this, and we'll get into some more scripture. Paul comes in and he tells them, hey, by the way, I want you to live different than what you've been living like. See, Paul came into a bunch of people who never knew Christ. We have people like that here tonight. You don't know Christ yet. But Paul came into that kind of a town. They never knew Christ. And he said, hey, by the way, I want to talk to you guys about like how you're doing your marriages. What's going on sexually in your marriage. I want to actually talk to you about that because there's going to have to be a different way you live now that Christ came in. So if Paul was here tonight, I believe Paul would say to all of us that are here tonight, there's a different way you have to live if you're gonna live for Christ in the age we're living in right now. He would probably say something like this. I know you won't like to hear it, but he'd probably say something like this. You have an iPad and you can go anywhere you want and look at anything you want. See, you could never do that before. A friend of mine does counseling at a national level, and he ministers to ministers. See, back in the day, a minister wasn't going down to the 7-Eleven or wherever to buy a Playboy because he's a pastor. He's not gonna walk in there and say, hey, Susie, yeah, I'll take one of those Playboys, thank you. He wasn't gonna do that. So what did he have to do? He would have to go to another town to do it. And none of them were gonna do that. Most of them were so poor they couldn't drive a car 5 miles back in the day, because they didn't have the gas money. So they didn't do it. Today, he said, this is what he told me. He said, ministers are at the highest rate ever at looking at porn, ever. Another friend of mine said that when TD Jakes, you all know who TD Jakes is, when he does his big conventions and people come to a city and there's 30, 40,000 people that come into the city, the hotels have more porn looked at that time than ever any other time. So here's what's happening. And I believe if Paul was here tonight, he'd be saying this to all of us. He'd just be saying this simple thing. If you can't handle looking at your phone or looking at your iPad and you have a problem with this, you immediately walk out of church tonight, and instead of throwing it away, you put a program on it that sends an email to your wife every time you look at something. Yeah, they have those isn't it awesome they have these programs for you? So, you just go on and say, look it up on Google. It's not hard to find. And you say, all right, I'm gonna attach this so that it goes to my wife or it goes to a friend, my guy friend, if you feel like I don't want my wife knowing that. But here's the deal. It won't do any good if every time your guy friend comes to you and says, hey, I noticed you've been looking at porn. Yeah, I'm struggling still, but I'm gonna overcome it. No, what you need is your wife to slap you around. Right? You need, or a husband, whoever it is, you need to have them say, don't be doing that. So Paul comes in, and this is the way marriages were before Paul came in, if you want to just write this down. In Corinth and Ephesus, this is how marriages were. First of all, they were prearranged. Now, I thought that was over, but it's not. There are still countries India is one of them, where they pick out the person that their son or their daughter is going to be marrying. So it's still going on. So there were pre-marriage, and then also there was what they called pleasure sex. Pleasure sex was you just go to the temple and have sex just for pleasure. And Paul, when he's writing, he's saying, hey, you can have pleasure sex, but it's gonna be in the marriage with the person you're married to. I know this is really heavy tonight. I know the word sex has been used and people are like not knowing what to do with this, but we need to talk about it. Where should you learn this? Should you learn this somewhere else? No, we need to hear it right here in church. Paul wrote about it in the Bible, right? So anyway, I'm gonna go back to 1 Corinthians chapter 7. So if you're still there, I just want you to read with me because Paul tells them, I wanna show you some different things about marriage. Watch this. 1 Corinthians 7:4, Message Bible. Marriage is not a place to stand up for your rights. Marriage is a decision to serve the other, whether in bed or out. Woo! Let's just stick with the first part. Marriage is not the place to stand up for your rights. Marriage is a decision to serve the other. Guys, listen, we live in a society right now, it's all about rights. It's all about me getting my rights. And we get programmed from a young age at that now. And we get programmed that as we're growing up in school. And here's the opposite. God is the complete opposite. Marriage isn't about what rights you get. Marriage is all about you being in a marriage where your whole goal is to serve the other person. How can I serve them? I love this part of it. He says, whether in bed or out. Now, technically, what he was talking about when you look in the Greek language, he's actually talking about what goes on in the bed. And what he's saying is, you need to honor the other person in the bed. Like, if my wife came to me and said, back in the day, I believe it or not, I tried to emulate John Travolta at one time. Back in the day. I know, it's crazy. Like, who would want to do that? I thought the Fonz was really cool, but then I saw John Travolta and I was like, oh my God, that's what I want to be like. But anyway, can you imagine if I was in bed with my wife and she told me, anytime, we're in bed together, I'm thinking about John Travolta. I'd be really mad. In other words, it has to stay pure even in the heart. It can't get unpure in any kind of way. And if it stays pure, that's when, believe it or not, that's when it's the most pleasurable, is when it stays pure. You're not thinking of somewhere else. You're not bringing something else into your bedroom. None of that kind of stuff. It stays pure. I know for some of you, this is really hard tonight. You're thinking, man, I wish I didn't come tonight. But I want you to know that I believe God put this in my heart to preach on in this series while I was studying out. And I did a lot of homework. It was like, all those statistics, I'd like you to find all those someday. I mean, it's a lot of work. So I did it on purpose because I wanted to show you that marriage, just living together doesn't make it work. And then you finally do get married. You need to find a person. You need to date them within a Christian boundary. And you need to say, when we get married, we're gonna keep it within the Christian boundary, which is we're gonna serve one another. We're not after just sex. We're not after just these things. We're after loving and serving one another. That will make a successful marriage. All right, so I'm about to close, so you can be happy, all right? But I'm gonna go to one other place, Ephesians chapter 5. If you can flip over there, Ephesians chapter 5. And I am gonna use the Message Bible. Ephesians chapter 5. Watch what this says. Ephesians 5:25 and 26 says this. Husbands, go all out in your love for your wives, exactly as Christ did for the church, a love marked by giving, not getting. Here's a new thought for marriage. Here's what he says. And I say that because that's what Paul's saying to them. Paul's saying, hey, Ephesus, I'm gonna give you a whole new thought on what marriage needs to be like. Marriage is marked by giving, not getting. It's a giving deal, not a getting deal. And man, if you're single, this individual that was talking to me today had been single a long time in their life and got married a little later in their life. And about this whole deal about the car that I was talking about. And they just don't understand, like, I'll do what I wanna do. And I tried to explain to them, see, it's not about you getting what you want. It's not about that. And most people think marriage is all about what I want to get what I want to get. And God's like, no, marriage is about giving. And here's the deal. You will never be able to outgive God. So if you give to your mate all the time, you're giving to them, God's going to get back to you. And ladies, listen, all ladies are made to respond. God made you this way. You're a responder. And if you love your wife the way the Bible talks about, she'll respond to that. Let's just read it. Watch this. Verse 26. Christ's love makes the church whole. His words evoke her beauty. Watch this. Everything he does and says is designed to bring the best out of her. Dressing her in dazzling white silk, he's talking about the church, radiant with holiness. Verse 28. And that is how husbands ought to love their wives. They're really doing themselves a favor since they're already one in marriage, he says. In other words, he's saying, you wanna have a really good marriage, you just need to do these things right here that he's saying. Love your wife like Christ loved the church. So I'm gonna give you just real quickly, you can write them down. I'm gonna give you 4 things just real quick that we can do as men in loving our wives. Making them feel like, you know what? I'm loving you like Christ loved the church. Number 1, if you're writing them down, number 1, your wife needs to feel like she's protected. Write it down. Number 1, your wife needs to feel like she's protected. You're protecting her. There's protection in your marriage. You know, I used to think that just meant, yeah, if someone ever tried to mess with her, I'd take him out. And that's really not what I'm talking about. Within the confines of marriage, every woman that is married wants to know that they're protected. They have a husband that his number one goal is protecting them. Number two, and I gotta go through them quickly because we're running out of time. Number two, they want affection. So here's what you need to do. You need to show your wife affection. Pastor, I'm just a guy's guy. I'm not affectionate. No. You can show them affection. God made you to be able to do that. There's no such thing as a person who cannot do this. You can be affectionate. So a wife needs to be shown affection. Number three, conversation. Conversation. Everyone look up here. I just want you to look up just for a minute. I laugh sometimes because I spend a lot of my time around men, and around guys, meetings, all this different stuff that I do, but a lot of times it's around guys. And here's what I find to be funny. They don't shut up. They love to talk. It just doesn't end. They're just always talking and you're like, wow, they talk. But it's interesting to me that when guys say this about their wives, when I get home, I just don't feel like talking. And we use that whole deal that we've heard. I spoke all the words that I speak in a day. I only have 10,000. I already spoke them all at work. And the truth of the matter is I've been with guys that talk just as much as women. No doubt about it. Smile on your brother. Come on, help me out. So ladies want to have conversations with their husbands, not grunts. We're at the dinner table, and it's like, how'd your day go? Anything happen? No. I'd be looking for someone else too. I mean, be like, come on, that's crazy. So conversation. And then number four, just write this down real quickly. Your wife is looking for this out of you if you're a gentleman, if you're a man. He's looking for thoughtfulness. My wife loves it when I'm thoughtful towards her for no reason. I'm not trying to get anything off of her. Come on, you know what I'm talking about. Most men become thoughtful because it's Friday night and we know what we want. So now I'm so thoughtful. Honey, I love you so much. I'm opening the door. I'm taking you out to dinner. Oh, you are awesome. I got my arm around you. Oh, sweetheart, you are so awesome. I got my arm around you during the movie. I'm rubbing you. After Friday night, Saturday comes along. It's like, get your own door, man. I'm done with that stuff. Right? Ephesians chapter 5, we're almost done. I just want to talk to ladies real quick about men, because I know right now you're like laughing and this is all good. So let me just talk to ladies real quick. We'll close up. Ephesians 5, verse 33 says this. However, each one of you also must love his wife as he loves himself, and the wife must respect her husband. The word respect is an interesting word. So I'm going to read out of the Amplified Bible. The Amplified just brings out all that word means in the Greek, the word respect. Listen to this. However, let each man of you without exception love his wife as being, in a sense, his very own self. And let the wife see that she respects, watch with the Amplified Bible, respects, reverences her husband, that she notices him, regards him, honors him, prefers him, venerates him, esteems him, that she defers to him, praises him, loves him, admires him exceedingly. Now, ladies, you want your husband to change? Just take Ephesians chapter 5 out of the Amplified Bible, write it down, and start doing one of these every day. And I know you might be here and think, you have no idea of the jerk that I'm married to. I can't do that. So look up here just for a moment. I'm almost done, I promise you. I believe on both sides, husbands and wives, this is what's gonna have to happen. There are gonna be times by faith you have to do some of these things. Do you know what that means by faith? That means that there are times you see none of the things that this even says. I'm gonna honor him, there's nothing to honor. I'm gonna admire him, there's nothing to admire. No, you can find something. And if you will start doing it by faith, then I will guarantee you will bring your husband to another level. He will come up to what you're doing. You admire him, you honor him, you say nice things about him, he'll come up to a different level as a man. But if all you ever say about him is negative stuff, you'll bring him down to a point that he's hard to deal with, and it's because of some of the things you say and do to him. So I'm just giving the ladies 3 things to write down. I know I gave 4, but I could give much more, but just here's 3 things real quickly. This is what you need to do for your husband. Number 1, respect him. Pastor, there's nothing to respect. Well, start respecting him by faith. Do the process of, I'm gonna respect this man by faith. Number 2, honor him. Every man wants honor. Every man wants respect. They might have done some things to lose it. You might have to rebuild it in your marriage. I understand that. But don't make them fight for the rest of their life just to get a little bit of honor from you. Because sooner or later, this is what will happen if you refuse to give it to them. They'll find honor and respect somewhere else. And that's not what you want. And that's not a threat. I'm just telling you, it's what happens in people's marriages all the time. Lastly, number 3, and they're all from the scripture that we just read, admire them. Admire them. You know, there are times my wife, she'll just send me a text. I'm in the middle of a meeting with a banker or something, you know, and I'll get a text on my phone and I see it's from her, you know, so I'm trying to actually pull my phone over to read it and make sure everything's okay. And she's like, I just want to tell you how proud I am of you. You're such a man of God. And I read that and think, she still doesn't know me. No, I'm just kidding. Just kidding. But there are times that you feel like when that comes, when your wife literally says, man, honey, I'm proud of you. You're just such a man of God that you're like, I'm still a man and everything. I'm just, you know, trying to serve God, but don't try to put me up there. But it makes you feel so good about yourself. It really does. My wife is proud of me. My wife admires me. That does something to a guy on the inside. All kidding aside tonight, let me just tell you this in closing this up. I want to see strong marriages. This is why we're teaching on what we're teaching on. I want to not see that the number in our church, even if you come every week to church, is at 27% divorce rate. I don't want that. I want 0. I don't want to see our church say, you know what, we have a really good church. We're only at 27 because we have everyone come every week. No. We don't want divorce. We want to do everything we can to work with someone so they don't get a divorce. And we have all kind of help that we can get you if you're here and you say, man, it's at the end. We have actually, let me just tell you some of the things we've done as a church. We don't do this all the time, but we've done it because we believe in marriage so much. We've sent people. There are 2 different places that I know of that are like this. It's for people that are at the end and they're saying there's no way they are gonna stay married. We're getting a divorce. We've sent them to a place, there's one in Atlanta, there's one in Branson. Gary Smalley started them. They're places you go when your marriage is about to blow up and it's done. And almost everyone that I know that we've sent there and told them, you need to go to it. If your marriage is worth it, you need to go to it. And they've gone to it. Almost everyone that I know, I'm trying to think right now, I think every one of them is still married and actually has a good marriage. And I mean, it's intense. You're there for 3 days, every day for 8 hours dealing with your marriage. Now, some of you are like, I would never do that. But see, it's how much is it worth? Is it worth that your children will have a mom and dad that have a good marriage? Let me tell you this, you don't want your kids looking at you and saying, we fight all the time, and that's what they're gonna do in their marriage because that's what they saw, so they're gonna do the exact same thing. If you live your life like your parents lived, and they're watching what you do, you're gonna have a screwed up life and a screwed up marriage. But if you can do this, if you can say, I'm willing to fight for my marriage, not fight in my marriage. Come on, I'm gonna help you here. Listen, some of you keep on fighting in your marriage, and here's the thing you need to start doing. I'm gonna fight for my marriage. I'm gonna be the man that says, I'll get help. I'm gonna be the man that says, I'm gonna get counseling. I'm gonna be the man that says, I'm stopping the behavior that my dad had, my family had. I'm gonna stop it. I'm not gonna have this in my family. I'm gonna be the woman that says, I'm not gonna be like my mom. I'm not gonna be the one that's always beating me down. I'm not gonna be that way. I'm gonna be the woman that goes and gets help, gets straightened out. And when I marry someone, I'm gonna honor them. I'm gonna respect them. I'm gonna raise them up instead of putting them down all the time. If you will do that, you'll break, and people call it a curse. It's really not a curse in this sense, but you can break the curse of that whole deal of what's gone on over all the years and say, we actually have a healthy marriage. Not perfect. My wife and I are not perfect in any means. We just have a healthy marriage. You can have a healthy marriage. And my goal tonight is for you to walk out of church and say, I'm gonna have a happily ever after marriage. And the reason I'm going to is I'm going to put my time into it and work on it. Not in any other way, for this reason, probably more than anything. It will actually make God happy. It will make Jesus happy, that he can look down and say, there's a couple that they will influence other people to have good marriages because of their good marriage. And we live in a screwed up world with marriage right now. So it'd be good to have our whole church say, we're staying together. We're not getting a divorce. And we're going to make it work. And we're going to have a strong marriage. Did you get anything out of this? All right, so I'm not sure if you're clapping because you got something out of it or if it's over. Because you know that's what I'm about to do is close it down. But I hope that it helped you out. I know there were a lot of statistics. I know there were a lot of things that was said, but here's the main thing. I believe that God's going to help you in your marriage, and it does not have to be a failure. Eyes are closed just for a moment. Heads are bowed.